Well, I'll tell you, Charles, hanging out with you, I can now say I've got friends in high places, and it results in us getting some amazing guests. We are joined by Carter Page. Carter, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be with you guys. Thanks a lot for having me.
Well, thanks a lot for everything that you have done and are doing. You've got a new book out, Abuse and Power. And I'd really like, if you have the time, for you to kind of give us the inside view of how this book came together and, tell us and tell our audience a bit about your story, what you've endured, what you've overcome, and what you hope to do.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Charles and Jason, for having me. I have I've been on the front lines of a lot of these crazy controversies related to the whole Russia scandal going back to the last presidential election. And unfortunately, what happened to me and all the trials and tribulations that I went through, it really increasingly, as we've seen over recent months, et cetera, is something that it's pretty clear can happen to everyone. And it's already so many other Trump supporters have been had so much pain inflicted by this terrible witch hunt and related illegal offenses against innocent American citizens. But I mean, the biggest real target of this whole scandal was, of course, none other than candidate Donald J. Trump, in a way which really continued throughout his transition period and throughout the early years to this day of the first term in office here. So the real genesis, I would say, is I've been planning to tell this story for a long time, and when the Inspector General report came out, U.S. Department of Justice Inspector General's FISA abuse report, talking about all the civil liberties and related crimes that were committed with the false court pleadings in the District of Columbia in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, I realized that, unfortunately, although it's a pretty comprehensive document in terms of uncovering a significant initial chunk of the wrongdoing, it was clear to me that it was very much a one-sided report. Unfortunately, they did a lot of research. I mean, I think the statistics, it was over 100 interviews, over 1 million documents reviewed by a massive team of lawyers over the course of a couple of years to uncover all the wrongdoing that was done. But unfortunately, it's one of these garbage in, garbage out situations where a lot of the same perpetrators who were advancing these civil rights abuses were the same people who are actually providing the testimony. Mm-hmm. So if you've got these people who are known to have, quote unquote, a lack of candor, who are known to make false statements in judicial forums, then it kind of creates a big problem. So unfortunately, I was kind of ground zero for a lot of these offenses, again, just based on the fact that I was a Trump campaign supporter and I happen to know something about Russia. Unfortunately, it was clear that I had to set the record straight, and so I decided kind of late last year after that report came out that I really needed to write this book and look at the various aspects of this horrendous scandal, which was a huge election interference in our last presidential election. And just from a timing perspective, I mean, we're less than 70 days to go to the next election now, and it was very clear with so many of these questions unanswered. I wanted to write this book to get the word out and make sure that this time around, after so many fake news stories helped to advance this election interference by the Democrats in 2016, I wanted to do everything in my power to make sure these types of offenses and voter misunderstanding and disinformation were not setting the public dialogue again this time in 2020.
Well, thank you so much for that. I mean, we think about today and overnight, you have the Kenosha violence, you have the Portland riots, you have concern across the political spectrum about police officers maybe acting outside their duties, possibly illegally. Your case is slightly different, and I think every bit as important, if not more important. I mean, here you are, somebody who got into the Naval Academy. My understanding is that's not so easy to do, and then graduated with honors, distinguished himself at many different graduate programs and in business, was in the service or helping this country, and you come to find out that during a pivotal election period, it's not, one or two rogue agents in one or more agencies. It seems at the very highest levels, to me anyway, of the FBI, the CIA, other security services, made a decision that, the law be damned. The result mattered. Hillary needed to win. Trump could not win. Trump couldn't stay in power once he did win. And let's just destroy this person. And if it can happen to you, it can happen to anybody in this country. So thank you so much for telling the story. I'm curious how far back you think this conspiracy against Trump and against you went. How much earlier than July 31st, 2016 might the antecedents for Crossfire Hurricane have started?
Well, you're raising some great points. Let me start with your one point about other allegations, if you will, of law enforcement misconduct. And I think it's important to highlight something which is quite distinct about this case. And there's actually a lot of this detail in chapter 4 of my book. So I actually, on September 25th, 2016, about 7 weeks before the 2016 election, I sent a letter to then FBI Director James Comey, just explaining how these false rumors that were being spread by the Democrats and pumped out through their media allies were just completely false. And I said to him, if I can help in any way, or if you have any other questions, because this is so blatantly clear how ridiculous this entire story is, please do not hesitate to contact me. Now, unfortunately, as now has been uncovered with this big Inspector General report we were just talking about, I had to wait for over 5 months. It wasn't until President Trump was already in office. I waited throughout the entire, another month and a half until the election, and then throughout the transition period, and then a couple months after that. And finally, in March of 2017, the FBI shows up and comes to hunt me down unannounced beforehand. And I finally had a chance to have a conversation with him. So I think what's key in terms of the differences, I was always wanting to help, in this case, the FBI. I was always a big supporter of law enforcement. And I had worked, and again, this is another aspect which is covered in various parts of my book, but I was a big supporter of the FBI as well as the CIA going back many, many years. So I was just willing and waiting and hoping that I could help. And unfortunately, and this is another example of just how multidimensional and how terrible this story was. Unfortunately, they just, continued this cover up and continued this whole hoax as a way of, I believe, causing damage to President Trump. And unfortunately, the big challenge, and another reason why it was important to write this book, is so much is hidden in government secrecy. If you look, and I know Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham, Chairman Johnson, Chairman Grassley, so many top members of Congress have been trying to uncover all this wrongdoing. And unfortunately, the FBI and other government agencies have not been very forthcoming and have not been very supportive in terms of these essential investigations. So, I think this book lays out an important groundwork, and I hope it helps to partially set the record straight. I think there was one other aspect to your question. I may have lost. I might not have covered everything. Was that helpful, or was there another?
It's very helpful. Let me ask the question slightly differently and give you some context. I specialize in exposing complex frauds. That's something I started doing in 2007, having retired in 2002 from being a banker. And in 2015, I came across the Clinton Foundation, and I quickly figured out it was a massive fraud. And the question for me was, could I trust the FBI? Because they actually missed, in quotes, this fraud from 2001 to 2005 when they investigated the Clinton Foundation. And the person who led that investigation was James Comey, as a U.S. attorney in the Southern District, alongside Robert Mueller. They both were briefed. There's 1,000 pages you can see for yourself online. So when I decided to get into this and wrote the piece I wrote for Breitbart March 16th, 2015, I got to people at Fox and elsewhere, and I asked them, people who knew Comey, do you trust James Comey? And I did not get an unequivocal, absolutely. It was like, I hadn't thought of that before. And then when you dig into the file on the Clinton Foundation, you find, in regard to the email investigation, that a high-level State Department informant, this is again on the FBI vault, sent a letter to James Comey in January of 2016 and said, hey, I have evidence that is at such a high level of clearance, we need to go into a SCIF for me to explain it, that Hillary Clinton and others, including Barack Obama, are breaking the law. And I'm going to send you this evidence. I want you to acknowledge it, and I want to meet. And Comey didn't respond. So January 27, 2016, this person shows up in the Washington field office and says, hey, Comey didn't respond. What's going on here? And the guy who had been leading the Clinton Foundation investigation abruptly quit at the end of January 2016. So with that context in the background, I'm wondering, how early Hillary Clinton's people targeted Trump and targeted you.
Sorry. Yes, that was the other. I knew there was another aspect. Yeah. So again, this goes back to the ongoing investigations, and exactly the same thing you had to deal with, Charles, in terms of people not giving you the full story or not giving you all the information in terms of making a definitive judgment. But I think one thing which has been a major development over the course of the last year or so are these continued revelations related to General Flynn, right? Now, another target of these heinous abuses by the U.S. intelligence community. And unfortunately, it's been a long time, but they continue to uncover various elements of these problems. And another major problem is just how political various members of the judiciary and the court system have become. And I think, our stories are different in many ways, but there's also a lot of overlap. And I think there's just so much more that needs to be understood. And it's just a huge uphill push, a huge uphill battle along the lines of what you've had to deal with over the years, when there's so much momentum and so much protection, if you will, for the Washington establishment and members of the political elite. And again, it speaks to, and I always bear in mind, and I always talk about how, this was never aimed as a way of just damaging me. There was a much bigger objective in mind. The fact that I was just a junior campaign volunteer for the Trump campaign in 2016. They were just using this false story as a way of damaging Donald J. Trump's candidacy and just continuing this whole process into the more recent years. And, one thing which my book does cover, and again, I was always very reluctant to talk about it previously, but the whole story of Spygate, right? And how there were various operatives who were ingratiating themselves to myself and other members or other supporters of the Trump campaign, including a great retired Air Force colonel who I talk about, the terrific, how great it was working with him, but a guy by the name of Sam Clovis.
Oh, Sam
And
Clovis, sure.
if you look at all the terrible things that he's had to deal with in these trying times and over the course of these last several years, it's really, really tragic in so many ways. So, long answer to your question, I think there have been some allegations, and there I believe there's some evidence that this Professor Halper from University of Cambridge in the UK had some prior interactions with General Flynn as well. And again, I've always been very careful about not pointing the finger until I know something for sure. And I was not directly part of those conversations, but there has certainly been some points uncovered related to that. And what I've tried to do in the book is underscore some of the overall sort of macro problems, and just highlight some of the open questions where really much more investigation needs to be done. And I'm, we can talk about that as well, but I'm cautiously optimistic after having so much of a cover up and so many problems created for myself on a personal level, but also watching everything that President Trump has to unfortunately deal with. It now seems like we may have a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of some of the more recent developments in this continued investigation.
So that's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that I look at as somebody who's never been in government service and has no interest in being government service, I always thought that government service involves service, that you were giving something up, that you were actually making a contribution and not doing things to get rich. And when I see a professor get a gigantic contract for hundreds of thousands of dollars, I don't know what he actually did for that work. And when I see, Brennan basically migrate between the CIA and for-profit contractors, when I see James Comey serve the country in the way he did, and then become a multimillionaire the way he did, and others like that, it turns my stomach, because I think there are a lot of upstanding people actually in government service who are not doing this to get rich. And the second you start getting involved in schemes, as I suspect Brennan and Comey and others have been involving multi-billionaires who may or may not have scruples, doing investment projects and projects around the world, you become, I think, quite vulnerable to, let's just say, I don't want to go as far as blackmail, but as crossing the line. And so I look at the period, really 1988 to the present, and especially 2000, early 2001 to the present, as a period where I naively expected American values to be spread around the world, and we'd have a global system that respected law and order and fair administration of justice. And instead we see, I think, bipartisan corruption spreading around the world, not simply involving Democrats, also involving, sadly, Republicans and independents, which is a long-winded way of saying, I think this plot goes way back further than 2015-16, and I think a lot of the guilty parties today are in terror that an independent, rich person like Donald Trump is actually going to drain this swamp. And so when I see Cambridge, I see Halper, and I see Sir Richard Dearlove, who's somebody we've talked about on this show previously, I think the roots of this scandal go very, very deep.
Yeah, look, and let me just add on another dimension to that along the lines of what you're saying. And I kind of alluded to that earlier in terms of how my story played out. But, this whole fake Russia story is a creation of the linkages between the Democratic Party and the media, right? I was totally an unknown private figure until September 2016, when the DNC funded consultants, Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele, finally succeeded in identifying a news organization which would put out these false stories, right? And along the lines of what you're talking about, of these people making transitions from supposedly public service and top positions in government. The other big transition is some of these, and there's been a lot of articles about this, how former U.S. intelligence officials kept joining MSNBC, CNN, other kind of left-leaning news organizations like that, which again, just bearing in mind, particularly in an election context, and particularly right now, just the it raises all kinds of questions as to the appropriateness, or in this case, lack of appropriateness. Because again, back in the day, it used to be that these individuals who may have served their country in some way, do something respectable after they leave. But I think this more recent precedent over the course of the last several years, where they just go out and become media pundits as a way of just demolishing President Trump, is really unfortunate in many ways.
It would be more concerning if 6 or more people actually watched MSNBC and CNN these days. I mean, it's become, for months, I think years, it's been unwatchable and embarrassing, frankly. Most of those channels. One of the things I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I don't know if it's in your book or not, is the strange state or evolution of affairs between the Obama administration and Russia. In the beginning, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were all in for the reset, even though they couldn't spell it properly in Russian. And it seemed like we were racing down a path at Skolkovo, this Silicon Valley idea in Russia where American companies might cooperate. It seemed like we were all hunky-dory. And then, for reasons that I can't fully explain, perhaps you can, the Obama administration flipped. And suddenly Russia was the enemy. We needed to support the people of Ukraine. Can you give us some perspective on that, the evolution of that, based on your experience?
Yeah, and I've lived, and I think it's a highly relevant question, because I think it speaks to part of the reason why they decided to paint a target on my back in particular, since my first trip to Moscow was during the Soviet era, back in the summer of 1991.
Oh, wow.
In the final months of the Soviet period, and I was actually at the U.S. Naval Academy. I was a Russian minor, and so I studied Russian language, and I've spent a lot of time there over the decades, and so I think from a big picture perspective, one of the fundamental problems is President Trump, and along the lines of what you're saying more broadly in terms of his approach and his willingness to shake things up and do something a little differently. That may have been most fundamental among the various things that he had on his was debating and proposing during his first presidential campaign, is a real transformation in terms of U.S.-Russia relations. And unfortunately, and along the lines of what you're referring to, there are a lot of vested interests, which uh, which have, which that cuts against in a very negative way. And so I think, I attribute a lot of the core problem to just a serious rivalry and a jealousy, if you will. And, again, I've spent countless, incalculable amount of time in Moscow and in Russia over the course of my career. And I've watched it evolve since the Soviet era. And this was the first time, the trips I made to Moscow in 2016, this was the first time that, for a lot of reasons, and this is a very broad consensus, there was great optimism about the things that a Trump administration might be able to do in terms of, at least returning to normalcy after all the terrible missteps during the Obama years and the time previously. So, I mean, this is a big problem, unfortunately, and I think it's a major reason why they came after him so hard. If you roll back the tape to the 1980s, and if you take, big picture perspective on what were then President Reagan's biggest, his administration's biggest accomplishments, there were a few things. There was, economic achievements. There were foreign policy achievements. But I think one of the biggest ones, I would suggest, is the end of the Soviet Union, right? And the steps he took, which helped to precipitate those changes.
But Carter, according to the New York Times, that was all because of the great wisdom of Democrat policy going way back before 1980. I'm kidding, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Well, all I know for sure, and I didn't land there in Sheremetyevo Airport until 1991, so it's difficult for me to say, and I always try not to say when I don't have firsthand perspectives. But from my firsthand perspective and being on the ground there, meeting a lot of scholars and people on the street and just talking to individuals there was definitely a great optimism that a new era is possible. And unfortunately, this entire scandal, this is one of the biggest tragedies. Besides for whatever these unscrupulous people have been able to do to myself, General Flynn, so many other Trump supporters, including the president himself, besides for just the personal aspect, this could have been, among the great accomplishments in terms of really redefining U.S. foreign policy to that key area of the world. And not to overstate it, because I know President Trump has done so much. Nonetheless, if you look at some of the transformational changes he's done in the Middle East and other regions, I think it's been very, very important and quantum leaps forward. Nonetheless, it really is a major shame that he really got robbed, I think. And again, it's based more on firsthand perspective, years of studying this region. It's sort of a fundamental aspect of what I did my PhD research on and what I taught for many years at the university level and lectured on around the world. But it's a real shame, and I think similar to some of the things that our country is grappling with now, we'll have to see what happens over the course of the next couple months as we come into the November election, because obviously, and this extends far beyond Russia, extends far beyond foreign policy, but our country could go two very different ways depending on what happens on November 3rd. So we'll have to wait and see.
Now, Carter, I know you've got limited time with us, but while we're talking about Ronald Reagan and his administration, I wonder if I can ask you about this article from The Intercept that speaks about Stephen Halper's role with the CIA spying on Jimmy Carter's campaign. It seems like there are a lot of people coming back into the news lately who may have had things to do with Iran-Contra. What else can you tell us about Stephen Halper that perhaps you know now that you might not have known when he was first introduced to you?
Well, again, and I, having been in foreign policy circles for decades, one of my, I actually, of all places, I was a research fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations
Uh-oh.
back back in the 1990s. And
Wow.
actually, the guy, if you go to, let me see on Stefan Halper's Wikipedia page, but at least the last time I looked a couple of years ago, let's see. Yeah, so a 1983 article which talks about this is written by a former New York Times reporter named Leslie Gelb.
Hmm.
And the title of the New York Times article from 1983 is Reagan Aides Describe Operation to Gather Inside Data on Carter. So and Les was the president of the Council on Foreign Relations during the year that I was there, and he was a good guy and helpful on some of my own research back in the day. So it's pretty interesting.
Carter, you're an extremely friendly guy, very likable, but I have to say, working for the Council on Foreign Relations in the CIA, it causes a lot of the comments to say things that I won't repeat, but people are wondering how they can trust that you're not an operative for the CIA.
Well, and this, I was always cautious about talking about these things previously, but for better and for worse, this U.S. Department of Justice Inspector General report uncovered the fact that I in fact have helped the CIA and the FBI over the course of my career. And, I always view it as just serving your country. I never did anything in any way unethical or questionable. I'm just, it's similar to my conversation with you today, Charles, just wanting to make sure that people have accurate insights and a correct view of what's going on in the world. So when I would meet with agents or when I would meet with senior officials in the CIA, for example, I'm just trying to share my real world perspectives. And unfortunately, this is one of the fundamental problems we have in Washington right now. And I think similarly, it's one of the reasons why they have not liked President Trump so much is he brings a different perspective. And I think, there's a lot of similarities in this context as well. Particularly, and I think we both the president and I share this worldview, but I think sometimes you need to shake things up a little bit in terms of trying different approaches and not just being stuck with the conventional wisdom all the time. And which was part of the reason why I originally volunteered for his important and historic campaign back in 1996.
Well, thank you for that. I want to ask you if you just got one more second. One of the things I've noticed is with the Clintons, when they accuse you of doing something or Clinton surrogates accuse you of doing something, typically it's because that's exactly what they're doing. And the irony here, in the last 24, 48 hours, John Solomon's done some more excellent reporting about the degree to which Ukraine likely meddled in the 2015-16 and afterwards election. How deeply have you gotten into that set of issues? That the Crossfire Hurricane file, the Christopher Steele work was originally, much of it was financed, I believe, by a Republican, and then it was transitioned over to Hillary Clinton. And there are quite of our work on the Clinton Foundation, there are some very shady, very wealthy Ukrainian people who are big supporters of Hillary Clinton.
Well, here's the one little nuance I would highlight, Charles, and I think it also underscores why this story is still relevant today and why getting to the bottom of it is so essential. a little, you've made some important and smart points, but let me just kind of clarify one thing. It was not just the Clinton campaign that paid for this.
Right.
There were a number of Democrat lawyers, a law firm involved in the whole dodgy dossier debacle, as well as an organization which led that big conference last week, known as the DNC. They were also a major funder of this whole entire sham, which was such a terrible election interference campaign and just did so much damage to our country on so many levels. So, different people have different perspectives in terms of Mrs. Clinton. I think, and people have various predictions as to how, what will happen in the future. But, the Clinton campaign is a largely seen in the past tense. For better and for worse, the DNC, which was a driver and a funder of this illicit operation, is still going strong and is leading many steps to try to reshape our country. And so I would just highlight that. And again, I talk about this in some detail in my book. And it's not. I think it's useful to keep sight of. Yes, those historic elements are important, but these are going concerns. DNC is not past tense; it's a present tense organization, and I think it's another reason why it's important that we finally get to the bottom of this terrible scandal.
Yeah, thank you. Now you're referring to Perkins Coie and Mark Elias when you talk about the law firm.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And other lawyers at that law firm. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What about Kevin Kleinsmith?
But that's also.
He's not with the law firm, but certainly pertinent to your story, Carter. Anything? I know you've been speaking a bit about him, but I mean, he's the guy who changed the evidence. Any thoughts or feelings about him?
Well, there's a lot to that, and I'll save some of it for my book because believe it or not, both myself and my lawyer in April of 2017 were dealing with Kevin Kleinsmith. And so I had mentioned in March of 2017, I had a long series of meetings with the FBI, thinking that they are, it's a respectable organization still, and they would try to do the right thing. Little did I know. But my lawyer asked to talk to an FBI lawyer towards the end of those 5 meetings after I got interrogated for over 10 hours. And the lawyer who the lawyer that was helping me at the time got connected with is none other than Kevin Kleinsmith himself. So there's a lot to that story. I mean, the one, and this goes back to what we've been talking about of, there's so much more that our country needs to get to the bottom of. The one reason, and part of the reason I was excited that after I had been waiting for the FBI to get back to me for so long after my September 2016 letter to James Comey, is I was getting a lot of death threats during that period.
That's not
so
good.
I informed Mr. Kleinsmith of that, and my lawyer did as well. And unfortunately, not only did they apparently do nothing about it, over the weeks and over the months that followed, there were more leaks, and unfortunately, those threatening calls nonetheless continued. So,
well, Carter, when you call the FBI about death threats, that's like that story Buddy Hackett used to tell about how Frank Sinatra saved his life. There were 5 guys beating him up, and Frank said, "That's enough."
Actually, it's funny you say that. Joe Piscopo told me a similar story. I was talking with him this morning. He brought that up there. Yeah, it's a good point.
There's one other thing I wanted to bring to your attention, Carter, because I mean, despite what anybody might say about you, it seems to me that you were targeted by somebody or multiple somebodies, and it's unclear if that is done yet. It's When people search Amazon.com for your name, as they are likely to do now that Abuse and Power is out and people can get it on Kindle, hardcover, Audible, all the different formats, searching for your name also brings up another book written by a social engineer who recently has been kicked off of several platforms for making false accusations against a U.S. Army reservist. He's released a book called Subsource Carter Page. I haven't read this, but I do believe it alleges that this author found that you were the subsource for the Steele dossier. And I happen to know that this is a person who spreads a lot of falsehoods. I wanted to bring this book to your attention to see if there's any truth to what's being said, and if there's not, to let you know so you can take appropriate action.
Well, and unfortunately, I think it goes without saying that there's no basis for that. I've been dealing with these crazy subsources, and actually the Inspector General, there's a lot of problems with that Inspector General report that the DOJ came out with last year, as I explained in my book. But they detail in at some length some of the problems that these various subsources and were doing in terms of these false pleadings against me. So, and unfortunately, in terms of false statements and defamatory reporting in books and articles, there's so much of that, and it's a long ongoing battle, which I've been grappling with on many fronts. But I hope, particularly this year, as we come into November here, my most immediate concern is that our country starts taking a more appropriate path. And again, as I mentioned up front, that's the objective of this book. And I hope your listeners and potential future readers benefit from that, because really there's a lot at stake. And with such a preponderance of disinformation, including the source you just alluded to, we definitely need to take some steps for getting to the truth. And I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come spend some time with you again, Charles and Jason. So really appreciate it.
Thank you, Carter. You've been very generous with your time, and you actually did serve your country and are serving your country. I think you're absolutely right. Our viewers and listeners are definitely going to want to get this book and read it, knowing that we face a choice on November 3rd. Joe, you can vote on November 4th. On November 3rd, it's very simple. It's jobs or mobs. It's that simple. And thanks again, Carter. I hope that your example, tough as it was, will serve as a reminder to President Trump and the people around him that we really need to get the scales of justice rebalanced. We need to have impartial, fair administration of the law. It is despicable for officers of the court to lie, put false evidence in against anybody in any place on the political spectrum. So thank you, Carter. Good luck to you. And I look forward to getting back in touch soon when it suits you.
Thank you so much. Great to be back with you, and I'll look forward to that too.
Good having you on, Carter. Thanks very much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Charles, Carter Page, pretty awesome. This is a great show.
You should come up with an idea to do a few shows now and again there, Jason.
Yeah. So it's important that people get over to Amazon.com and purchase Carter's book. I also just got the Audible book. I find myself spending so much time cooking and making these different graphics and stuff so I can listen to these books.
I could take these out.
Yeah.
So, I think it's interesting, this idea of doing discussions with authors and other people on Wednesday. What I found just in my own personal life, because I have friends who do this, is that even if you're a famous guy like Carter Page or Ann Coulter, or you pick it, because fewer and fewer media outlets do book reviews, and because fewer and fewer people actually read books, it becomes tougher and tougher for accomplished authors and their publishing houses to get this type of forum. And we just spent almost 40 minutes or thereabouts, no commercials, no My Pillow things, no drugs for bent, what is bent crank disease, none of that. Just a real in-depth, probing discussion where we could go back and forth. We could give the author a chance to really express him or herself. And
Ask a couple of uncomfortable questions about the CFR.
That's your job. Yeah, but no, it was a good opportunity, and I hope we'll be able to continue to do these type of things, because there are this particular set of abuses perpetrated going back to, I think, the Bush years, and if not before, where people figured out, rather than making a better product or service, what you do is you just buy a politician. And then when you buy the politician or multiple politicians, you get government money, you get breaks, you don't get prosecuted, you prosecute your enemies and rivals. That's just, banana dictatorship stuff. And we have got to take this country back away from the Stefan Halpers, from the Bill and Hillary Clintons and their backers, and from the Bush family. And that's what this election is all about, frankly, and coming up now very soon. So yeah, thanks for organizing this, Jason. It's great to have Carter on. We'll see him again, I hope. We've got other people in store.
Catherine is asking if we've interviewed Ann Coulter, and certainly I haven't, but I'm not at liberty to discuss.
I know Ann Coulter.
I know.
Not that way, but I do know. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to do, I've had a revelation here that I wanted to share with the audience that we can do now that we've done so many of these things, and you're so adept at the computer. We might want to put up the chief, excuse this description of this public servant, the chief ass clown of New York State. Who is that? What's this guy's name? I'm getting old, I can't remember.
I think you mean Cuomo.
That's who I do mean, yeah. Now, we rushed through it a little bit on Sunday when we didn't have access to a computer, so it wouldn't be that easy to go through this. But
cracking down on Brooklyn weddings. Says you don't want Hasidic Jewish people getting married when you could be destroying the city and renting out your friends' hotels.
Right, exactly, through your homeless shelter charity. But if we go into Andrew Cuomo's life Wikipedia page, of course he got his start in New York politics because it's not the family business. I mean, his father wasn't previously the governor of the state. He's not from a dynastic political family like the Bushes, the Clintons, etc. If you go through this, you look down here. I
got to this by looking up Smiling Jackass.
You look further down, he's the 64th Attorney General of New York from January 1st, 2007 to December 31st, 2010, preceded by Elliot Spitzer, who had a black sock problem, and succeeded by Eric Schneiderman.
A credit card problem.
And Eric Schneiderman, who had a fool problem. But in this crucial period, January 1st, 2007 to December 31st, 2010, in the same way that Letitia James, as Attorney General, is unfairly targeting,
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, is unfairly, let me just finish it, unfairly targeting the NRA, Bannon, the Trump Foundation, etc. Cuomo was in a position where he could have regulated the Clinton Foundation. He could have done it. And I know he's, so smart and such a genius lawyer, and he would, have
Is
been
he a
able.
lawyer? He's a lawyer.
I think he's a liar.
Wow.
I think he may also be a lawyer. Actually, if you look further down, education. I think it says personal life, maybe early life and education. Here you go. JD from Albany Law School, which actually is a good law school, but of course it didn't hurt that his father was the governor.
Right.
But anyway. Let's take a look here at, if we go into the New York State Attorney General Charity Bureau search thing, NYSAG, yeah. And if we punch into the EIN 311580204, okay. And we'll get
the other four.
And then you have to go further down the page and hit search. Yeah. Then we hit that link here, Bill, Hillary, Chelsea Clinton. And we look further down the site, and the laws and the regulations in New York State are actually quite tough as written. But of course, if you have a crook as the Attorney General, a political hack, as we do now.
Don't have to follow them.
Yeah, these laws are for other people. Do you see here, let's see, bylaws, organizational rules. You hit that thing. They were received June 27th, 2017. So this is for the Bill, Hillary, and at the top of the page here, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation doing business as Clinton Foundation.
Hang on, though. Look at this, Charles.
Yeah.
How do you get crooked letters with a...
It's Crooked Hillary.
But that's weird. That's like typewriter stuff, not computer printout
Well, I think
stuff.
you're going to see in a second why, because I'm going to show you this. The principal office of Bill Hillary and Chelsea Clinton Foundation, DBA Clinton Foundation, and hereinafter referred to as, notice it says the corporation, uppercase C, blah, blah, blah. So it's the Bill Hillary and Chelsea Clinton Foundation. The first time you see this, June 27th, 2017. Let me show you the real bylaws for the Clinton Foundation, okay? If we go back into Google and we punch in Clinton Foundation annual, and not report, but it's okay, just yeah. And then we hit tax exempt materials in this section.
This?
Yep. Go in there, and then further down the page, further down. Tax exempt materials, Clinton Foundation 1023. All right, this gives you the tax exempt, the application for federal tax exemption, which may or may not be the complete application, and probably isn't. But if you go down maybe 10 pages or so, we will get to the Articles of Incorporation, and we will get to the bylaws. Now keep going slowly now, a little bit more slowly. Here's the Certificate of Incorporation. Here's the Articles of Incorporation of the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. You note they're dated October 23rd, 1997. Okay? And it says here, the name of the corporation is the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. It also says in here, which is the name of the corporation, which is hereinafter referred to as the, in quotes, uppercase corporation. This is not a minor thing. This is what's called a defined term. When you have a defined term, you can assume, when we talk about duration, you're talking about the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. Here's a defined term. You don't want to amend this and fail to have the defined term in, which is what they did later. You don't want to do that. But let's keep going down the page. This is incorporated on October 23rd, 1997, and in the bylaws, I think it's a little bit further down. It said there's a bylaws section. It might be, maybe I got it. Yeah, bylaws. All right. Under the Arkansas state law, a corporation to be organized has to adopt bylaws. This is, these articles of incorporation have to conform with the statute. Okay, and they sort of do. But you can't have a corporation operating for any meaningful period of time without selecting actual trustees, not incorporators, which were the lawyers in this case, and adopting bylaws. So we go down, this is the end of it. Here, it's the incorporators, not the trustees who incorporate this thing. So they form it, but they don't organize it on October 23rd. Keep going down the page. And you'll see the bylaws after this at the very, keep going, please, almost, there we go. All right, here. The William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. You notice this type that you noticed before is in the Bill Hillary, Chelsea Clinton. See, it's the same kind of type. It's wobbly, but it gives the real name, the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. And it doesn't say amended and restated bylaws. It says bylaws. So this is the only set of bylaws that in the beginning were adopted. We don't know by whom, but if you go down the page, you'll see that there's in different type at the very end, it's maybe 10 pages in, you'll see that they were adopted, or in theory, on the 23rd of December, 1997, meaning that the thing operated, you passed it, yeah. Further, it's right over, next page up, right there. See that this type is different than the type, right? 23rd of December, it looks different to me anyway. And so these are not signed.
It's a different font.
Yeah, these are not signed by anybody, so we don't know who adopted this. We don't know if there actually was a Board of Trustees meeting to adopt these bylaws, but the thing we do know is that these bylaws were adopted on the 23rd day of December 1997, i.e. 62 days or thereabouts after the thing was incorporated. So that means it functioned for 62 days without bylaws, something you legally can't do. So all these activities, which included on November 7th, 1997, Bill and Hillary selecting the site in Little Rock for the foundation when neither was an officer, neither was an agent, and there were no bylaws, would tend to gut a legal argument that this thing was an independent entity and compliance with law, eligible for tax exemption. But no matter, Bill was president of the United States and he does what he wants, right? So, okay, there's one example of bylaws. We see the one from 1997 is for the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. Now let's go back into the main Clinton site there. Yeah, and let's look at 2005. Further down here, 2005. Okay, and we go down the page. There's 78 pages. You notice this file, but it includes the BKD fraud that we've talked about before. Completely invented financial statements. We've gone ad nauseum through it. These need to be withdrawn and corrected if it's possible at this late date. But when we get into the 990, we discover an admission. If we go slowly through it, this is now suddenly it's called William J. Clinton Foundation. Now you can't go from the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation to another name without actually amending your articles of incorporation. And if you do that, changing the name, you should amend your bylaws. So
and it's not a typo because they're doing it all over the place.
Right. And you'll see there's a section here where it says, it asks in the 990, did you do anything to change your organizational form? And they say, yeah, we amended our bylaws. But they don't provide, well, if we go slowly through it, I'll show it to you. You can keep going. It's in the statement section, with a type with different, not the form section. You'll get to it. A little bit, you keep going. This is general explanation. Actually, back up here. You see, this is an interesting one. A little bit further. It says, the following stocks were contributed, right? And it lists $10 million worth of stock.
Whoa, look at them though. Kellogg.
Yeah, okay, but what's going to be really, remember this, and this says contributed, not contributed, which must be,
This is Ross Perot, isn't it? EDS?
Yeah. But look at this.
What the hell is he doing giving money to the
No. Well, you'll see who actually, they've purposefully obscured who gave the contributions, and it's going to be somebody who's very much in the news.
Contributed.
Is contributed. It's different than a contribution. It's a contribution or whatever. So keep going down, if you would, Jason, please. You'll see they say, it's almost maybe the next page or the page after. A little bit further.
Oh.
Keep going. Bank loans. Slowly, that one. The William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation amended and restated the bylaws effective April 25th, 2005. Okay? The William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. Okay? Now, this version of the 990 purposefully omits, in my view, the actual bylaws, the amended version, which should have been attached. How do we find them? We go into ProPublica Nonprofit Explorer.
Okay.
And I'm doing this slowly for Andrew Cuomo and Tish James so that they can enforce the law and see what an obvious fraud this is.
I'm not sure they can read.
Yeah. So
what's that?
I don't know.
Data.
So you just punch in Bill, Hillary, Chelsea, Clinton. Yeah, that should do it. And this search. And then hit the blue link and go to 2005. And hit that. This is the real version that was received and it says it's a name change for the entity, right? It's received on November 8th, 2006. What happened on November 7th, 2006, do you think, Jason?
The election?
Yeah. When Hillary Clinton was running and when Andrew Cuomo was running for Attorney General. So they want to make sure that this fraudulent form reached the IRS after the election. And this fraudulent form has, there's basically nothing right about it. The revenues are wrong, all kinds of things are wrong with it. But let's go to that page where it lists the securities.
Which page?
The one that said these are contributed. It's probably
On this one? Oh, no, it's in the same one you're saying, right, that error.
It's going to be a different page number because this one doesn't have the...
Oh, and this is harder to search because of the way they have it sucked into
You'll see it'll come up in a few minutes, a few seconds.
Contributed will stick out like a sore thumb.
It's right there. Right? Yeah, okay. What does it say there? The following stocks were contributed by who?
Bing, the guy who jumped out the window.
Just recently, yeah.
What the hell is
$10
that
million
about?
bucks is a lot to contribute.
I hope he had it stacked up in $1 bills at the bottom of
stocks.
the building. Well, they get the papers printed out because he jumped out of that building and needs something to...
Right. But it's interesting, isn't it, that this is the one that you can see, but the Clinton Foundation felt it was important to hide that Stephen Bing was the contributor.
Even back then, before he killed himself.
And Stephen Bing was employing Bill Clinton through his, if you look on the Clinton Foundation, we don't need to go to it, but if you look in the Clinton Foundation Clinton personal tax returns, you'll see that Shangri-La, which I think is the Stephen Bing operation, was paying...
Shangri-La, the hotels?
It's a real estate development company. I don't know that it's the same one as in the Far East, but I think he had something called Shangri-La, and it was paying Bill Clinton, and they didn't, if you're a significant contributor to a foundation, and you're also employing Bill Clinton, who was not an officer or director at that time, but nonetheless says that he controlled the Clinton Foundation, you got to tease those relationships out and explain them fully in 990s and in state forms, but of course they didn't do that.
What does his shirt say? Bob Dylan?
Yeah.
And Bill Clinton's like, look, do you want a suicide or a car accident? you can't do that.
Right.
It's happening.
Right. So if we go back into the filing for a sec.
Stop the comedy shtick.
No, I just want to. No, I want to just show people the bylaws because it's interesting. So keep going down the page. Notice this is 78 pages as well.
But this one you want from ProPublica?
Yeah. This one, if you look at the top of the page, how many pages is this one? I think, 72. So it's close in length. But if you go down the.
Let's do it this way. It'll be easier to look at.
Yeah, and if we go down, you'll get to the bylaws, the real bylaws, the amended bylaws. So.
Is this it?
Keep going, please. It'll come up like suddenly, change type, and then it'll. Almost there. Should be next page. Here we go. The William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation amended and restated bylaws. Okay.
So someone did doctor the type at the top of it.
Well, this was changed April 25th. If you go to the end of this, there are other things like 10 pages in. This was amended on April 25th, 2005, and signed by the dumbest chief financial officer still working for a not-for-profit, whose name is there you go, Andrew Kessel. And you see these above his signature. These amended and restated bylaws are adopted. That looks to me like this 25th day of April.
It looks like they've changed a 5 to a 6, or made it so that you can't tell if it's a 5.
It's either a 5 or a 6. But nonetheless, this is for an entity supposedly called the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation, right? Now, bylaws have to have the same name as articles of incorporation. Articles of incorporation are the public face, or explain to the public how a corporation is organized, and they are filed publicly. Bylaws are not necessarily available to the public. These bylaws recount how the officers and trustees or directors of an entity intend to run the entity. It's kind of like the rule book for the entity. Yeah, whereas the articles of incorporation lay out the authorized purposes and certain key facts that the public has an absolute right to know. So here they change the name. They keep the name, the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. That's the only version of the bylaws that is outstanding until you see a version that comes in, I believe, 2013, which we won't get into, for Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation. But this is, as far as the world knows, this is the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation, and those are the bylaws.
I'll just tell you something real quick. I just glanced over here for a second and saw that 25. It's a 25 somebody changed to a 26. Because in first glance, that's what it looked like to me, and I
Right.
say that's what it is. And
Okay.
I'm going by that Martin Getty's, what is it?
I don't know.
Cullen always talks about this book, how your first instinct,
Oh, yeah.
I forget what it's called.
Go with your gut. But anyway, so now let's go back to the New York State site. And we'll go, if you can get into the
What was it, New York?
you had it there, charities,
NYS Charities Bureau. There it is.
You have to do 31158 through, no,
Yeah.
1580204. That's 168. No, that's right. Then search.
See that? We're getting very accustomed to fives turning into sixes.
One way or another. Okay, and Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation. We go down to Articles of Incorporation. You'll see Certificate of Incorporation, July 9th, 2009. Okay? Now this shows, and again, this is the dumbest chief financial officer operating a serious or supposedly serious charity in America. He gets a certificate issued the 13th day of June 2005. Here is the amendment, okay? On the same date, either the 25th...
Charlie Daniels. He went down to Georgia.
The William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation has changed in Article 1. They say, instead of saying the name of the corporation, hereinafter uppercase corporation, they say the name of the organization shall be the William J. Clinton Foundation on precisely the same day as they amend the bylaws of an entity called the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. And this Nimrod, Kessel, waits until, or his lawyers wait until the 28th of April 2005, 3 days later, to file a document saying he's changed the name of the entity to the William J. Clinton Foundation, destroying the integrity of the entity because the Articles of Incorporation no longer define the uppercase C corporation, so it just destroys the entity. The articles are destroyed, and in addition, there are no bylaws for an entity called the William J. Clinton
It
Foundation.
sounds like stuff they would do on purpose.
Well, it's just like, how do I destroy my integrity and my company?
Why would they do it?
Well, it's because clearly they assumed that nobody would check and it didn't matter and it's Arkansas and they do what they want.
But, I mean, didn't they do it to obfuscate something so they could do crimes with it later and then no one would know or something?
So as a guess, what they've been doing all along here, the reason why this is so very, very important for whoever is overseeing the criminal justice system in the United States and around the world, the standard trick with charity fraud is you create something that sounds like it could be legitimate. And then you get sloppy, in quotes, and you have the Jason Goodman Media Foundation, and then it's like you have it. That's the real name of it. Then you have some Kessel. You hire Kessel or his evil twin brother and he doesn't have a twin brother as far as I know, to go open a bank account for the Jason Goodman Media, spelled MEEDIA Foundation, and you go to like HSBC and you get a recommendation for James Comey. Hey, I want to open up an account for this thing. Well, that doesn't look like it's spelled properly. Just shut up. And
I'd prefer to spell it MEATIER, meteor.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So the trick here is, in the United States, what you are allowed to do is
Fictitious name.
You could use fictitious names, but more if you've got, you're associated with a president, the future president of the United States, something, banks will bend the rules.
Wow.
Attorney General will bend the rule and they'll allow you to open a bank account for an entity that is not really the entity. And now you've got something that you could wire money into. You wire $1 million in and you take $1 million out in cash, and nobody's the wiser because you're going to hire a schlock accounting firm, BKD, and keep them in place for however many years they were in place, who's not going to check and ask a simple question under penalties of perjury, under threat of a civil lawsuit. Tell us every single bank account that has been opened in relation to any part of the Clinton Foundation. And
people also raised the point that we could call it the Jason Goodman Meteor Foundation.
There you go.
So we've got a lot of options for this criminal enterprise.
So here for Andrew Cuomo, who's too so busy getting his chest nipples pierced or whatever. here's a case that was there. You had an entity that had been operating in New York starting in 1998 without registering to solicit in advance, that had no authority to do anything outside of Little Rock, that nonetheless was opening secret offices in New York State, down at 77 Wall and elsewhere, that was getting involved in all sorts of initiatives that sound nice, but for which they had no approval, that was raising all kinds of money without getting audits together. It was doing all of this, and by January of 2007, had finally gotten in enough trouble with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had begun instituting a program to shut Ira Magaziner's operations down in Massachusetts, where they were, in theory, fighting HIV/AIDS internationally. All of this is a file which, from January 1st, 2007 to December 31st, 2010, if there were a real FBI team, you would be going in and you'd be reviewing what were the communications amongst the various Clinton trustees. What was this work that Kamiki Gibson did in 2008? How extensively did you look at all this stuff? How much of this stuff was known to lawyers and officers of the court and accountants? Why did they perpetuate this fraud? Why did they expand the fraud? Why did Barack Obama contribute to this fraud out of his Nobel Peace Prize winnings in 2010? There are a lot of excellent questions we've raised over the course of 250 plus videos. And it's time, frankly, we've let the various investigations run their course. We've let the politicians say, oh yeah, we're going to drain the swamp. The freaking swamp needs to be drained, and we need to see signs of it draining. We need to see various and sundry people spiraling down the dirty toilet bowl that they deserve to spiral down, including Comey and Mueller and Brennan and the Clintons and the trustees and the accountants and the lawyers. This is an example which, not left uncured, and God forbid, left in a place where basement bewildered Biden ends up running the country. Venezuela will look like and Zimbabwe will look like garden spots compared to what this country will look like if we don't do something soon about the swamp. We are running out of time. The 60-day rule, which is really not a formal rule, it's just an understanding.
No sniffing 60 days before the election.
Right. The 60-day rule, actually, from my interpretation, first was adopted in 2004, just as the Clinton Foundation, the investigations and quotes by the FBI, IRS, and Justice Department, that just as they reached a place where they really wanted to go for it, 60 days before the 2004 election, for some inexplicable reason, back in 2004, they backed off a real investigation of the Clinton Foundation, even though there were no audits, the paperwork was disastrous, they've been operating internationally when they shouldn't have been, and all sorts of problems. They decided not to go for it. So based on that precedent, we're told in 2020, we got to follow this precedent. Now that you've got all this information together, definitely don't indict or prosecute anybody, because that would maybe stop the corruption.
What's with this rule? How do you make a rule like, oh no, you can't prosecute criminals?
It sounds good to the unwashed.
What?
It's like, are you a criminal by chance?
Yeah. And also, since when do we have rules rather than laws? If that's a good rule, why don't they vote on it and make it a law?
Right, exactly. So that was just a sort of a seat of the pants exercise here, just to remind the folks in New York State and around the world, it is an open and shut case to make against the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation. Going back into the records, the Presidential Records Act, and the rules and regulations that govern archives, I question. There is no legal organization, I think, intact called the Clinton Foundation or any variant thereof. I would go so far as to question whether we even know all the records that were created during the Clinton presidency, and maybe the prior presidencies included, but and certainly from January 20th, 1993, January 20th, 2001, I am willing to bet that substantial numbers of incriminating presidential records, as these are defined by the Presidential Records Act of 1978, substantial numbers of these have been destroyed. Yeah, and I'm also willing
Only
to
the bad ones, though, Charles.
Well, I'm also willing to bet that they're insurance copies, that people have, were aware of this, and that a process, if you had real, loyal, non-political people go back through the Clinton Foundation and say, all right, I want the provenance file. I want to know every single outgoing record from the National Archives, when it left, where it went, and how it ended up at the Clinton Foundation. I want to go compare what was sent to what is there. Then I
Whose pants they were in.
Exactly. And I want to look and see, are there other memos out there, extant memos, that refer to documents that are missing in the Clinton Foundation archives. And I'm willing to bet, now that the time has passed, there's a 5-year rule initially where you can deny stuff, and then there's a further 12-year rule. And I think we're way past that now.
12-year rule. These just sound like the statutes of limitations for criminals, how long they have to perpetuate the lies.
Well, it's easy. I mean, the average president leaves at a certain age. We want to make sure that, so long as that person's alive, you can't find out about the crimes. So I'm making this up, but...
Well, that's why George Bush was alive for so long. Charles, maybe we could invite James Patterson onto the show next week to talk about his new book, The President's Records Are Missing. Oh, he didn't write that book.
No, he didn't. Not so much.
He's not writing that book.
No, he's not writing that book.
Well, there's a lot more to discuss with regard to Andrew Cuomo, and is it Help USA? What's the charity?
Yeah, his sister is now, I think his sister's name is Maria Cuomo Cole, C-O-L-E. They created a charity that on the surface sounds like, could be interesting. I think it's Leadership Help USA. There you go.
Yeah.
And the idea behind it is, let's look at the board of directors. Who is Anthony Williams?
Anthony Williams?
Yeah.
Where do we see that?
Charles Grodin is on the board of this.
I was going to say, I think Anthony Williams, I thought he was an actor, but...
No, he's I think he actually might have gone to Horace Mann. He might have been a politician or something. No, this is a charity that in theory, and Jeffrey Sachs is on the board of it. He's a bad dude. But this is a charity that the Cuomos have been involved with forever that in theory helps homeless people. And it helps them by putting them into shelters and into housing. And there are lots and lots of related charities and related entities. And this is a project that we will be digging into, because it's yet another, when you say dynastic political family, and you say charity, and you say unexplained wealth, and you say getting government grants, it just reeks. And we can't do it justice, I think, in the remaining minutes we have today, but we're going to dig into it. And people who have ideas about it and want to reach out to us, feel free to contact us. But this is we've got to root out the corruption that's inherent when dynastic political families decide to get involved in unregulated charities where donors can make a lot of money if government contracts go and zoning goes in a certain way.
Like perhaps sending all the homeless people to hotels that somebody owns who maybe wants to get rid of that hotel anyway because nobody is staying in it because the land is valuable but the hotel is dilapidated, so let's fill it up with homeless people for several months, then wreck it, then build a fancy hotel.
Exactly.
Plus we'll drive everybody out of the neighborhood so we can buy up all the real estate around there for a fraction of the price that it was 6 months ago.
Right.
And we can own all of New York.
Yeah.
These dynastic families, Charles, I think it's more of an insidious problem than people realize because it permeates politics. Everybody knows that media has an incredibly tight relationship with politics, and it looks like I'm going to be going deeper into an investigation of how Hollywood awards shows can be used to actually seriously manipulate the news, politics, elections. I think it's important, a lot of people laugh about this thing, fake news, primarily because it really came to prominence when Trump began speaking about it. But fake news becomes fake history.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have, I think, when we think about media going back, let's say to 2000, in 20 years, what was left of the New York Times reputation has been eviscerated by their bold mismanagement and fraudulent reporting and by the fact that technology has changed and made it possible for you to do this type of work that you do and others to emulate it. And of course, the growing importance of Facebook ads and Google ads and others has put the small daily, weekly, monthly papers out of business. And so you have this big change in the way things are going on. And the traditional media is on the one hand extremely hungry for ad revenues, and the other hand desperately needs to have access to the top people. So if you're in the Obama administration, you're Valerie Jarrett, and you go to CNN, you say, listen, or Mika Brzezinski, wherever she was, you say, listen, Mika, I like you, I don't know why, I guess it just proves I'm an idiot, everybody knows that, but I'm going to be, if you stay on my good side, okay, I'm going to give you early word on anything having to do with Barack Obama. You're going to have preferred access to all our people.
But don't report on any of my criminal activity.
And make sure that you sell the idea that we're going to make a scandal-free administration by colluding and conspiring to bury any reporting on all our scandals, because that's the way we're going to live in la-la land. And I think that's more or less what did happen in 2009 to 2017, January to January. And the folks in media land knew the second that Trump was actually going to be the president, they knew they were in real trouble, because Trump had the ability to, as he's demonstrated, to go out above the media, direct on Twitter, direct here and there. He's a master at dealing with the public direct. And meanwhile, Facebook and others are going to pummel the traditional media, and these folks get more and more deranged and hysterical, to the point now where you look at the audiences. I don't know if you have to ever watch MSNBC or CNN. I mean, last night I was, Fox, much as I like some of their reporting, they just insisted on, instead of showing the actual speaking, they insisted on having anchors interrupt everybody and go off and interrupt the whole flow of it. So I said, God, this is horrible.
Why would they do that?
I don't know. But so I went to CNN, which did less of it, and they showed more of the whole spectacle.
Why not just watch the thing I was watching
C-SPAN
on YouTube. Yeah,
I'll probably do that tonight. But anyway, the point is that it's easy to understand why there would be a conspiracy between the cronies and the media execs and the advertisers and the politicians and the academics. Because, if somebody says to you, I suppose I have some credibility in part because I went to Yale and went to Harvard Business School, and people look at that and say, well, if he went to Yale and went to Harvard Business School, he must know how to get through school anyway. And I like to think that my accomplishments have little to do with that and more to do what I've done, at least in this field, since 2007 when I started exposing fraud, which has nothing to do with Yale, or maybe it has something now to do with Yale and Harvard.
It's one of those things where, when I was in Hollywood, before I was on the movie Spider-Man, it was still me. But after I got that job, so many people who just treated me like a douchebag previously were like, oh, we want you to come do an interview for this and be on this movie and do this thing and talk about our thing in Variety. And I was like,
no.
No, I would do it, but it showed me a lot about those people that acted that way, that until you have that credential where somebody else has said, this is a real barrier to entry in a lot of fields. Because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, Charles. There is a lot of cronyism and a lot of nepotism. You just brought up Mika Brzezinski. I don't know, would she have that job if her father wasn't, what was he, Secretary of State, National
Security Advisor, and nearly destroyed the modern world under Carter.
Right. But if he wasn't so influential in government, would she ever get to that position? And the impact that media has on this stuff, I've been talking a lot about the Emmys lately and how the president of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences personally has struck a video on the Jason Goodman YouTube channel that right now is preventing 114,000 subscribers from being notified about this video. It's going to reduce the number of people who hear your message about Cuomo, who hear Carter Page's message about his book and the things that he was talking about. And it was a remarkably strategic attack from a guy who used to be a principal, a highly placed executive at Twitter, who was in charge of news, politics, and elections. Now, Twitter ostensibly started as some stupid app on the phone that grew to such prominence, but I don't think so. I think they had designs to do something with it from the beginning. And Charles, I've learned something today that I really want to share with everybody that adds even more intrigue to this story. And I'm not suggesting anything, but we've spoken about how the president of television's father was a news correspondent for CBS and ABC, but I did not realize that he was the individual who told the world that Lee Harvey Oswald is dead. He was in the Dallas police station when Oswald was shot, and he featured very prominently in the reporting on the JFK assassination. Now, I know a lot of people who watch Crowdsource the Truth are aware of the Frank Church Senate hearings where he was investigating the CIA in 1975 or 1978.
75.
Well after this. And William Colby, the director of the CIA, admitted to Operation Mockingbird. He declassified it. He said that they were paying news people. I don't know if Roger Sharp was named as a participant in that program, but it certainly seems curious. And it takes me back to what you were raising about these dynastic families. Is this a situation where someone puts pressure on somebody and says, look, either you can be marginalized and have the 1963 equivalent of your YouTube channel being struck so that you never get off the ground, or you can tell stories that we want you to tell. You're going to win Emmys, you're going to rise to prominence, and maybe someday your son could run the Emmys. I'm not saying that's what happened, but we can hypothesize about a situation where perhaps that would happen. And this guy, Adam Sharp, who struck the channel, he's giving out news Emmys, sports Emmys. So I can imagine a world where a Jason Goodman is working at NBC News reporting on how the Dallas police tested Lee Harvey Oswald's hands and there was no gunshot residue on his face, no indication that he fired a rifle that day. If Lee Harvey Oswald had ever had a trial and evidence was fairly presented, he would have surely been exonerated. But reporting like this made sure that he's gone down in history as the murderer of JFK. And perhaps that secret is being jealously protected to this day because disciples of that regime, the Bushes, then the Clintons, then the Obamas, to today, need to be protected by these dynastic political and media families, because these award shows, that is where the politics of entertainment meet. And I'm just saying, there's something to look at here.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff. I think there's no question that when you say that you're a Pulitzer Prize winning author or you're an Emmy Award winning television person or an Academy Award, people who don't know anything about the business will say, well, that's fantastic. Now, I think in certain cases it is well deserved, but in many cases it isn't. It's like saying, do you know that so-and-so is a member of the American Airlines Admirals Club?
Oh, that means you flew 1,000 miles. Well, I mean, of course it can be well deserved, but the problem is it's not like an open voting system where the people who are watching TV vote on it. This is, I think, the most objectionable aspect of what I'm doing with Crowdsource the Truth to traditional media and even new media. YouTube, normally, it was set up so that you can make money on YouTube by having popular videos that advertisers want to put their ads on. It's essentially the same model as television. You buy a television, and then before cable or whatever, all the programs are free and the stuff gets advertised. So, as we've heard from Del Bigtree and others, if you want to do a story about some pill from Pfizer doing bad stuff, if Pfizer is your biggest attitude, your biggest advertiser, someone's going to tell you, don't do that story. And the thing that I've done by creating this direct viewer sponsorship, micro sponsorship, where for $2 or $5 a month, people are going on to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I've eliminated that concentration of power in these billionaire corporations that get to decide what goes out on the news,
right,
and who gets rewarded for doing what type of reporting and all this kind of stuff. And it seems that the person at the top of that power structure has taken interest. So it's more important than ever for people to sponsor the show. I'm really glad, Charles, that we're able to get great guests like Carter Page. And of course, the information that you've been bringing forward for the past 3 years, I think is another little something that maybe there are certain powerful people who would rather have you marginalized, not have this outlet to send the information all over the place. So there's powerful forces working against Crowdsource the Truth.
Yeah, interestingly, one thing we should probably close with. Did you see that Columbia Journalism school piece about the influence of the Gates Foundation on the media? Zero Hedge had a piece on it.
Let's just look for that real quick.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Here's a piece of news. Is Andrew Cuomo responsible for thousands of nursing home deaths? The DOJ is trying to find out.
That's awesome. We're going to have to check that out. Let's just see what we can find. Is that it? Yeah.
How the Gates Foundation manipulates the media.
I mean, this is no surprise to our viewers, but, anyone who, whoops.
Being manipulated. So if you think about it, in 2018, when the mainstream media was very interested in elements of mainstream media were very interested in the theory that I had been involved somehow with Peter Smith and Julian Assange or whatever. And next thing you know, every single, big ticket mainstream group has my phone numbers, calling me, asking me questions, this and that. And every time I said, lady, gentleman, whatever, whoever it might be, aren't you interested in understanding the potential motivation? What would drive the Obama figures to do this? My editor,
you to get arrested.
Yeah, my editors won't let us cut. We can't look at the Clinton Foundation. My editors won't let me go there. I don't have the bandwidth to go there, but I can ask you all kinds of absurd questions. And I think there's a limited number of editors, senior editors, who all talk to one another, all socialize with one another, and they get together and they decide, okay, what's the story going to be today? What do we focus on today? And if one of their number gets up and says, well, that's been debunked, or this is a conspiracy theorist, or Charles is too close to the Russians or the Chinese, or does this, or Jason does that, or whatever, they just spike it. And instead of actually being the fourth estate, instead of being the group that actually holds government accountable, it becomes the wet blanket that is thrown on anybody who wants to get to the truth. And it's really, it is an epic battle. I mean, you have this guy, I mean, if as much as I loathe the Clintons and for what they've done to this country and much of the world, I have to say that comparing 2020 to 2016, believe it or not, Hillary Clinton ran a better campaign than Joe Biden.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, and that's before she did the faceplant on September 11th. We don't know what Biden's going to do on September 11th. I doubt he's going to get up and do jumping jacks. And so we have the situation where it seems to me the Democrats believe they can steal the election. They
have all these people behind them. I forgot to mention the president of television, his Twitter feed, which, by the way, he's the Archduke of Twitter. He's been on there since 2009. He's got like 38,000 Twitter followers. I've been there 2016 and there's 34,000. He is so for Joe Biden. I think people should know. I mean, look, the director of, or the CEO and president of the Television Academy can be politically biased, I suppose. But people should know that if they're going to tune into the Emmys, and people should know what they're supporting when they watch these programs and buy the products advertised on there. They should know the types of things that this guy is doing behind the scenes, because he's trying to incapacitate this YouTube channel, my business, our ability to get this information out, and he's doing it in an underhanded way.
Well, yeah, and if you're for Joe Biden, right? What are you for? You're for corruption. You're for incompetence.
Burning down cities.
Look at this guy. I mean, how could you take somebody with a 47-year history of fucking up, and who's part of a family that it seems to be, by most accounts, inherently corrupt beyond, in certain ways, beyond the Clintons even? How can you think that putting money and influence and your support behind this Yahoo in 2020 is going to make any sense whatsoever? Do you really think that the communist Chinese are quaking in their boots thinking, oh my God,
Come on, man.
Yeah, right.
That's his go-to line.
All right, yeah. Come on, man. You lying dog-faced pony soldier. I mean,
he's going to hang out with Xi. He's going to be like, listen, fat, we're doing push-ups.
Right, exactly.
But Xi's like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how he's going to get Kim Jong-un out of the coma.
That's right, exactly.
Go to the hospital and do push-ups.
I sent you that one thing, right? We don't know if we can get it. There's Kim Jong-un saying, how come Joe Biden doesn't have COVID? He spends all his time sniffing everybody's hair.
Right.
But seriously, you look at this guy, and in Trump, my reservation about Trump in 2016 was, while I admired what he had done over the course of a decades-long career in his own business, it's one thing to do that even in a tough business when it's your family business and you got family money behind you. It's one thing to do that. It's yet another thing to try to manage the unmanageable government that we have.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't sure that he would actually make it through the swamp once he got elected, and maybe he won't.
It does feel like he's grown into it, though.
Yeah.
Like he's learning the flow a bit. I mean, there's still some things that
But with Biden, it's like, he is the swamp. I mean, he's the definition of the swamp. How can you be supportive of that unless you like the swamp? You feed well in the swamp. You like, sloshing around in the swamp.
Protecting the swamp.
Right. And so really, it is a very crystal clear choice that I think people have before them, not just at the presidential level, but more importantly at the House level, at the Senate level, at the local level. As I said to Carter, it's jobs or mobs. Take your pick.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to having a future opportunity to learn some more about Stephen Halper's crack smoking and involvement in covering up Iran-Contra, which, by the way, was all about cocaine. So perhaps if you're one of the people involved in a big, giant cocaine smuggling thing, smoking crack is just what you do.
You got to use the product.
Right. But it seems like, William Barr, there's so many more questions I could ask Carter Page. I hope we'll have an opportunity to do that. But that was a great interview. Excellent show, Charles. I think there's a lot more for us to talk about with the Cuomos, the Sharps, what's going on with the Emmys, why they're choosing to strike my channel. I'm not going to go into details on it now, but there is so much there.
Sure.
It's not a coincidence.
When are the Emmys? Do they come up soon?
Well, yes, they're in September. I mean, wouldn't we think the president of the whole damn thing has something better to do with his time a month before their biggest event of the year than to be sitting there striking my channel with his personal YouTube account?
Well, he's trying to decide who to give the news Emmy to, Jake Tapper or Mika Brzezinski, or...
I honestly believe, Charles, that when they look at what's happening, the transition to new media, and it's like YouTube and Patreon and all these things are just an intermediate step, because the truth of the matter is, if an organization like Crowdsource the Truth can grow to sufficient financial strength, where I could lease those services from data centers that aren't public things, that have, community guidelines where if they don't like what I say about a particular subject, they can strike it as hate speech. I mean, what this guy's done is he's making a copyright claim. It's a legal claim. They're accusing me of violating a civil tort and even certain laws. But YouTube is not a court, and YouTube does not give me the presumption of innocence, doesn't put the burden of proof on them. It just allows them to strike the video. Now, when I've tried to arbitrate through the YouTube process, he's retracted and sent his lawyers after me, who are not communicating with me as quickly as I think they should. And they're sort of playing this YouTube process against the legal process to maximize the shutdown, it would seem.
Well, I hope you prevail.
It's hurting everybody, including you, as far as getting the word out, the other co-hosts whose livelihood depends on people sponsoring the various shows. And I think people really need to think about that. They need to think about what's going on. They need to think about how the ideas that I'm sort of proposing as far as how the show is sponsored fundamentally change the way television or viewing, motion picture content has existed forever on TV. And that's what the Emmys are protecting. It's all about cronyism. It's all about nepotism. And it's all about protecting the powerful elite.
Or trying to.
Got to smash that.
Yeah.
Anyway, Charles, we'll, if the weather allows, we will brave the streets of New York City once again on Sunday. We got to come up with a good place to go. If people have been watching us live right now, you've been watching on Crowdsource the Truth 2. And if you're watching later, it will be on the Jason Goodman channel, but we can't live stream there. So make sure you sign up to Patreon and subscribe star. Don't miss a show. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. Shepard Ambellis is joining me tomorrow. We're going to talk about all these asteroids and some of the strange things going on in Wisconsin and the rioting that continues. So I'll see everybody then. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.